Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
I worked on the television show Wild Bill Hickok for 7 years. Yes, in addition to Andy Devine. Prior to the television show, I created 15 feature images. Prior to Guy Madison, one of those who died, the Golden Age stars of Hollywood, released a shocking revelation that would alter our perception of Tinseltown's history. Well known for his untamed charisma and the lead part as Wild Madison's Bill Hickok was the ideal leading man. Tall, attractive, and fascinating. However, beneath the immaculate exterior, Madison led a covert existence, one that it wasn't until the latter years of his existence. For many years, the actor had remained silent regarding his connections with other males, connections that were concealed from the general public. After a while, when homosexuality wasn't simply a taboo subject on, but deliberately repressed in, these intimate connections in Hollywood weren't merely private, they were a survival issue. As Madison's professional thrived, his need to maintain his real identity hidden. However, prior to his passing, he made the courageous decision to revealing some of the most well-known actors with whom he had collaborated, numerous individuals who were also residing in the shadows. The revelation was shocking. Some find it startling, while others find it validated what had been hypothesized for years. However, why did Madison decide to do this now, the conclusion of his life to shatter his quiet? As it happens, the reality was fair, more intricate and extensive than nobody could have predicted. Guy Madison's hardships, military duty, his breakthrough as Hickok the Wild. The birth date of Guy Madison is January 19th, Pumpkin Center, California in 1922. A tiny hamlet that is equally a part of his history as the major cities that he would eventually discover. Madison was raised in Amethyst setting far from the lights Hollywood lights. His parents, as well as his upbringing in a tiny town, didn't precisely predict the life of a glamorous movie star. However, from an early age, Madison possessed a keen awareness of drive and ambition, qualities that would later define his life. Continue. Madison grew up in California, became interested in sports and outdoor pursuits, which would eventually transfer into his well-known roles as westerns with tough, manly characters, well as action movies. He wasn't only the attractive lead actor. Madison possessed a physical presence that caused him to stand out. As World War II began in the early 1940s was having a negative impact on young guys everywhere, Madison was no different from the rest of the nation. When he started attending the University of Berkeley, California, where he started his university instruction. But as the conflict intensified, Madison, similar to many of his peers, decided to sign up. His tenure at Berkeley's tenure was brief as he responded, enlistment in the United States Army during Second World War, a choice that would mold him into the man he would be. Madison participated in the wartime Army, an encounter that might subsequently impact the parts he performed. Additionally, his service allowed him to travel and witness the world, offering a fresh viewpoint on life and expanding his perspectives. Following Madison came home after the war. However, he was not the same individual who had left to battle. Following World War II, the Hollywood environment was shifting. A new generation of actors was starting to appear, and the sector was searching for new people to join its ranks. 4. The war had been a turning point for Guy Madison. Returning to civilian life, Madison made the decision to work in action, a choice that would result into Hollywood's brilliant lights. In the latter part of the 1940s, Madison moved to Hollywood, hoping to profit on his attractive appearance and military experience. Initially, entering the field wasn't as simple as he had imagined. The contest was intense, and the chances were limited. At first, Madison had trouble locating important responsibilities, frequently landing bit roles or appearing in movies that didn't give him plenty of options. He wasn't but the celebrity he would eventually become, and it was unclear if he would be capable of stand out among the other young actors, competing for pay attention. However, Madison's perseverance paid off. The late 1940s saw him sign an agreement with Warner Brothers, a significant studio back then. This was a big move for Madison, because that was his first experience with an formal agreement with a studio, offering him with the support and publicity he required. But in spite of this boost, his Warner Brothers' early years weren't simple. Although the agreement provided him with a level of protection, it didn't lead to important jobs right away. Madison was still having trouble locating his footing in the system of Hollywood. Right now point, Madison's journey to fame was lengthy, from certain. He encountered a lot of actors. Hollywood experience, denial, disappointment, as well as a number of unimpressive roles. However, his innate charm and appearance on screen didn't work. Overlooked. Despite the sluggish beginning, his Warner Brothers time enabled him to develop his portfolio, acquire expertise, and above all, capture the director's attention who would, subsequently, aid in the beginning of his career, as Guy Warner Brothers signed Madison as a client. Not everything went as planned. Similar to many in the late 1940s, he encountered young actors the fact that he must work his way up the positions in a field that frequently favored well-known celebrities. The initial years of his career were full of small parts. This, in part, did not emphasize his entire potential. It is simple to believe that a deal with a big studio would instantly make a performer famous. However, the truth was much more difficult. Numerous actors, such as Madison, had to demonstrate their worth repeatedly before obtaining the kinds of positions that would make them well known. Madison's initial roles were frequently eclipsed by more well-known names. At Warner Brothers, he showed up in a number of movies that weren't very successful, in effect that left him feeling doubt regarding his prospects in Hollywood. It was not unusual for performers top-positioned Madison to become disheartened. There was fierce rivalry, and there was constant pressure to perform in the present. However, Madison's determination kept him going, despite the annoyances and disappointments. Among the most challenging elements of, at the time, breaking into Hollywood was the performer's lack of authority over their professions. By the late 1940s, a lot of stars had rigorous contracts with studios, which frequently indicated that they had limited influence over the types of roles they played. This absence of artistic flexibility was a persistent difficulty for Madison, who, in spite of his talent and attractiveness, have to work via a system that never failed to recognize his potential. Unions, affairs, as well as Hollywood's emphasis on his private life. The ascent of Guy Madison to Hollywood stardom was nothing short of amazing. Following years of hardship in little parts, he finally rose to known due of his portrayal of the hit Wild Bill Hickok, the Wild Bill Hickok television series, but his professional life was but a portion of the narrative. Madison's private life and relationships also garnered media attention throughout his life, frequently taking precedence over his career achievements. Late in the 1950s and Madison's Playboy reputation in the 1960s become an important component of his audience. Dod persona. Well known for his connections, his private life with multiple women frequently garnered greater media coverage than his career in acting. The glitzy existence of a Hollywood celebrity was undoubtedly a thrilling one, although it had its own number of difficulties and disputes, especially when it came to reconcile the demands of a career with theromance and popular appeal examination. Madison has 3 spouses. Occasionally, every marriage has its own tale of romance, heartache, and occasionally public controversy. His initial union with Gail Russell, an actress, is arguably the most known as it was at the time of In 1966, the night of the grizzly they met. Russell was then going through her personal difficulties in Hollywood. Although the union also brought Madison some happiness. major challenges, such as the demands of being a well-known pair in the spotlight. Russell was well known for her weakened mental state, and their connection encountered numerous difficulties. In a manner, Madison's private life was influenced by the rigors of his profession and this relationship's emotional toll. The couple's union ultimately came to an end in divorce, but they still spend time together, a pivotal period in Madison's life. Following the dissolution of his first marriage, Madison remarried. Regretfully, specifics of this relationship are a little hazy because it's not as well known as his first. His second wife, who is still unidentified, a little mysterious, lacked Thea's well known as Madison or his first spouse. But the marriage, such as divorced after his first. His second, perhaps the relationship wasn't as strong. Profile, although it continued. To be included in the account of Madison's private life, it kept the people interested. Madison's third marriage at last was to former model Patricia Hardy and actress. Patricia worked in her own field and she wasn't as famous in Hollywood as her spouse. The two appeared to be together to establish consistency in their private lives after Madison's previous partnerships. Together, the couple had kids, and Madison initially seemed to be living a more tranquil, contented life. Nevertheless, even this union was not without its difficulties, as well as the pair also ended up divorcing. This prevented him from expanding into uncharted Hollywood territory. As if his professional obstacles weren't, nevertheless, Madison also had to deal with personal challenges throughout this period. Battles with alcoholism started to negatively impact his private life and ultimately on his career as well. Despite these difficulties were never extensively widely known in the 1970s, they nevertheless played a role in his decline. Profession. Like a lot of performers from his day, Madison was subject to pressures that had an impact on his drinking, and mental health issues became strategies for managing the strain of his failing, both personally and professionally, disappointments. These problems, albeit not extensively covered at the time, would later included in his personal story, which helped him withdraw away from the general public. However, he wasn't completely missing from the entertainment. Madison's world during the 1970s and 1980s, appearances were irregular and devoid of the prominence of his previous work, among the few noteworthy parts he played during. During this time, a guest appearance was made on the popular television show The Rockford Files series that differed greatly from the westerns that have characterized him in the past. His played a brief part in The Rockford Files. One of the few times he made an televised appearance, although it wasn't enough to spark his career again. The success of the event, in addition to Madison's decreased visibility, demonstrating the distance, he has lost his formerly recognizable status. In the 70s and 80s, Madison's notoriety as a movie and television star continued to exist only in the past. As in previous years, he was hailed a son of Hollywood's most prominent figures. He was demoted to minor this time. Roles that didn't leave a lasting impression, influence. The motion picture and television industries had passed, and the period of the Western star had mostly dimmed. The contributions Madison made to the genre, although devoted fans continued to value it, were insufficient to support his profession in a quickly evolving landscape of entertainment. Guy Madison's covert homosexual partnerships, exposing the concealed reality before to his passing. The globe of vintage Hollywood was a glamorous one. Renown and, for many celebrities, privacy. For decades, numerous of the largest names were terrified of their own life being made public, particularly in relation to their sexual identities. Guy was one such celebrity, Madison, a popular hero on Western television whose personal life was kept with strict confidentiality. Secret when he was at the top of his game. An infamous autobiography published following Madison disclosed after his passing that even though his heterosexual public persona he had been a romantic playboy. Connections with a number of well-known closed-off homosexual actors of his era, such as Tyrone Power, Ramon Navarro, Rock Hudson, and Anthony Perkins. Madison's autobiography that surfaced reveals new information decades after his death. Illumination of the intricate and frequently unpleasant face of his existence, as the general public liked him for playing Wild Bill. In the television show The Adventures, Wild Bill Hickok's personal life was intensely passionate and secretive. Chaos, determined by the social hostility toward homosexuality in Hollywood in those days. The autobiography reveals the relationships he kept hidden, alongside these well-known actors, many of whom dwelt in the obscurity of the general public people, while under duress to preserve a particular masculine image as well as heterosexuality for their professions. The confidentiality of these relationships were more than just a personal one, Madison's burden, but also a representation of the broader surroundings of Hollywood at the middle of the 19th century. Sexual orientation, particularly for males, in Hollywood was considered a taboo profession. Murderer. The anxiety of being discovered could destroy a performer's career, especially for Madison, for example, who had constructed identify himself as the rough. The hero on the small screen was straight-laced. Madison later acknowledged in his narrative, the psychological cost of concealing his identity was enormous. Among the most notable features of Madison's revelations was the overwhelming burden of secrets that plagued him all the time his existence. "I didn't really have the liberty to be who I am," Madison said in an open examination of the inner difficulties he encountered. "Every time I received near someone, I needed to consider the consequences. There was a persistent fear. I felt that if the truth were revealed, everything I had worked for would come to an end." 4. This psychological cost was not exclusive. Like many of his peers did to Madison, Hollywood likewise struggled with comparable anxieties. Madison disclosed the actors as Roni Navarro, a member of his inner group, Rock, Tyrone Power, and Anthony Perkins Hudson, was also a victim of the harsh environment of industry when it pertaining to sexuality. These guys really commemorated their day. Everyone faced their personal battles with their sexual identities, being aware that being absent could result in a nightmare for public relations that might cause their jobs to fail. Ramon Navarro, one of the first people to come out as gay Hollywood, celebrities, renowned for having their sexual orientation concealed from the general public, and only after he passed away, that a large portion of his private life was illumination. In his discussions with Madison, Navarro disclosed the risks associated with leading a double life. "I must exercise caution when deciding whom to trust." Navarro once informed Madison that if word spread, it would ruin me. Navarro's personal battles with his identity was similar to that of numerous others in the field across the time, since he always walked a good distinction between his public image and personal reality. Likewise, Rock Hudson, among the most popular celebrities in Hollywood, was also a gay man who kept to himself and confronted tremendous pressure to keep the delusion of heterosexuality. The association between Hudson was one of mutual support with Madison. Both men are aware of the sensitive harmony between their public personas and personal lives. I used to joke with Rock that we were more adept than the CIA in maintaining secrecy. His autobiography, Madison reflected on their companionship. However, the strain of persistently concealing one's actual identity caused long-lasting wounds. Hudson's final. His sexual orientation was made public. Just prior to his passing, there was a pivotal moment in the evolution of Hollywood sentiments regarding LGBTQ+ people. Anthony Perkins, well known for playing Psycho and the famous Norman Bates, as well had comparable difficulties. In his personal, Perkins had a reputation for having connections with both women and men, although the world didn't know his actual identity. Perkins' friendship with Madison was founded on a common awareness of the demands they both encountered in their private lives. "You are unable to believe anyone," Perkins once said. Madison, describing his level of paranoia, frequently thought that his interactions were exposed. "I keep everything secret because it's over after one mistake." Another of Hollywood's biggest stars, Tyrone Power prominent figures, was renowned for his charisma and attractiveness, but his connections with men were kept secret as well. Strength. And Madison and his partner were more than just bodily. It was emotionally charged, encouraging as they both attempted to manage with the terror and loneliness that followed with their private life. Power's personal fears of being exposed were echoed. Madison clarified in his memoir that even if he was buddies with Power, they were never able to publicly discuss their relationship. Eyes were constantly present. "Observing," Madison said, "we were never permitted to be free." The weight of this secrecy's effects significantly on Madison, as it did for numerous prominent celebrities of his era, as the world considered these men to be successful and glamorous. Actors, they were frequently confined to an emotional captivity they have created for themselves. Madison experiences the ongoing fear that came with retaining such a significant portion. It was tiring to keep his identity a secret. "I had the impression that I was living two lives." In his memoir, Madison shared his secrets. Additionally, maintaining those lives was never simple. Keep apart. It was exhausting. Hollywood studios contributed significantly to maintaining the quiet around homosexuality. In this period, the majority of actors had to sign a morals pledge. Provisions, including stipulations regarding their private life and connections. These provisions were basically agreements that specified how an actor needs to act in public and privately. Violating these provisions, especially by publicly identifying as LGBT, could lead to a loss of employment, penalties, and other serious consequences. The apprehension of being in public outing was about more than simply embarrassment, but also about surviving in the workplace. Madison was one of several actors who were compelled to maintain their connections with other males who are secretly closeted in order to keep up their careers. In his autobiography, Madison wrote openly regarding how the urge to fit in Hollywood norms produced an internal disagreement. "We were instructed on what to say and who to show ourselves to others and to love the globe," he said. "And if you didn't adhere to the guidelines, you were expelled." The risk of being discovered hung heavy over him. Additionally, in spite of the intense emotional relationships he had with these men, Madison was aware of their connections. The people would never accept it. The emotional toll included more than just the ongoing concealment, but also the awareness that if the truth ever surfaced out, their professional futures would be at risk.